The words still echo in my mind like broken glass. "You're nothing, Ryan. You'll always be nothing." Jessica's voice cut through the crowded company party as she stood there. Her arm wrapped around Robert Kane's waist, my billionaire boss smirking down at me with that same condescending smile he'd worn for 3 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What neither of them knew in that moment was that I owned 47% of Kane Industries through a network of shell companies. What they couldn't see was that with a single phone call, I could collapse Robert's empire like a house of cards. But sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't the one you take immediately. Sometimes it's the one that comes from becoming the person you were always meant to be. Looking back, I realized that everything started falling apart the moment I decided to keep my grandfather's inheritance a secret. But at the time, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Jessica and I had been together for 2 years, living in our cozy apartment in South Austin, splitting rent down the middle, taking turns buying groceries, living what everyone would call a normal working-class life. She was a marketing coordinator at a local digital agency, and I was a senior software engineer at Kane Industries, pulling in a decent salary but nothing extraordinary. We were that couple your friends would describe as solid or stable, the kind of relationship built on shared Netflix passwords and Sunday morning coffee runs. What Jessica didn't know was that 3 months into our relationship, I had inherited $8 million from my grandfather's estate. Harold Mitchell had been a quiet man who lived modestly his entire life, driving the same Ford pickup for 20 years and shopping at thrift stores by choice rather than necessity. When the lawyers called to inform me about the inheritance, I was sitting in a Kane Industries conference room, half listening to Robert Kane drone on about quarterly projections while mentally calculating how many months of ramen noodles I had left in my budget. Inheritance changed everything and nothing all at once. I could have told Jessica immediately, could have celebrated with champagne and started making plans for our future. Instead, I found myself hesitating. There was something pure about what we had, something authentic about struggling together. Splitting a $20 dinner and feeling grateful for the luxury. I had watched too many relationships crumble under the weight of money, had seen friends become different people when their circumstances changed. So I made a decision that would define the next 2 years of my life. I would keep the money secret, invest it wisely, and only reveal it when I was absolutely certain about our future together. David Park, my investment advisor at Sterling Capital Management, became my closest confidant during those early months. A sharp man in his 50s with an uncanny ability to spot emerging tech companies before they exploded into mainstream success, David helped me diversify the inheritance across a portfolio of carefully selected investments. But it was David who first brought Kane Industries to my attention as an acquisition opportunity. "Your boss is brilliant," David explained during one of our monthly meetings, "but he's cash poor. Kane Industries has incredible potential, revolutionary AI technology. But Robert's burning through venture capital faster than he can secure new funding rounds. The company could either become the next Microsoft or collapse within 18 months. I studied the financial reports David had compiled, recognizing the software architecture I had helped build, the algorithms I had debugged late into countless nights. Kane Industries was my daily life, but seeing it through an investor's lens revealed vulnerabilities I had never considered. Robert Kane, for all his public bravado and billionaire reputation, was operating on borrowed time and leveraged dreams. What if we approached this differently? I suggested an idea forming as I spoke. Instead of a direct acquisition, what if we created a network of shell companies to gradually acquire shares? Anonymous investments that Robert would welcome. Without knowing who was behind them, David's eyes lit up with understanding. Want to become a silent partner in your own workplace? Over the following months, we executed the plan with surgical precision. Sterling Holdings, Phoenix Ventures, and Meridian Capital became the vehicles through which I gradually acquired a controlling stake in Kane Industries. Each investment was structured to appear as separate entities, different investment firms with no apparent connection to each other or to me. Robert Kane celebrated each new round of funding, never suspecting that his mysterious benefactors were actually his own employee. the man he treated with casual dismissal during daily meetings. Jessica noticed changes in my behavior, but I attributed them to work stress and career ambitions. I had started staying late at the office, not because Robert demanded it, but because I was secretly reviewing acquisition targets and analyzing market reports. My evenings were spent on encrypted video calls with David, monitoring our investments and planning our next moves. When Jessica suggested weekend trips or spontaneous dinners out, I would decline, claiming budget constraints while simultaneously approving six-figure investments from my hidden accounts. The psychological weight of maintaining such an elaborate deception began affecting our relationship in ways I didn't immediately recognize. Jessica would talk about her dreams of traveling to Europe, and I would nod sympathetically while knowing I could book us first-class tickets to anywhere in the world without checking my bank balance. She would stress about her student loan payments. I would offer emotional support while possessing the means to eliminate her debt with a single transfer. The disconnect between my authentic feelings for her and my inability to share my true circumstances created a distance that grew wider each week. Marcus Wheeler, my best friend since college, became an unwitting test of my commitment to secrecy. Marcus was a talented musician who had been struggling to make ends meet, playing small venues around Austin and working part-time at a guitar shop to pay his bills. When he approached me about a small loan to help him record a demo album, I found myself in an impossible position. I could have funded his entire musical career without impact on my portfolio. But doing so would have raised questions I wasn't prepared to answer. "I wish I could help, man," I told him over beers at our usual spot, watching his face fall with disappointment. "Things are tight for me too right now." The lie burned in my throat, but I convinced myself it was necessary to maintain the larger illusion. Marcus accepted my refusal with grace, never knowing that I was simultaneously approving a $250,000 investment in a startup that would fail within 6 months. My relationship with Jessica began showing strain in subtle but significant ways. She would comment on my distraction during conversations, the way I would check my phone constantly during dinner, monitoring stock prices and investment updates. I had developed a habit of mentally calculating portfolio values while she talked about her day, nodding at appropriate moments while my mind was occupied with financial projections and market analysis. "You seem like you're somewhere else lately," Jessica mentioned one evening as we prepared dinner together. "Is everything okay at work?" The irony of her question struck me immediately. Work had never been better from a financial perspective. My investments in Kane Industries were performing beyond my most optimistic projections, and the company was expanding into new markets with technology I had helped develop. But professionally, I was still treated as just another employee, still subjected to Robert Kane's casual condescension and overlooked for promotions that went to candidates with better networking skills rather than technical expertise. "Just the usual corporate politics," I replied, deflecting her concern while seasoning the pasta we were preparing. "Robert's been pushing everyone pretty hard lately." Jessica nodded understandingly, but I caught the brief flash of concern in her eyes. She had always been perceptive about emotional undercurrents, and my growing detachment wasn't going unnoticed. The woman who had fallen in love with my authenticity and openness was now living with someone who was fundamentally dishonest about the most important aspects of his life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The turning point came during our second anniversary dinner. Jessica had chosen a modest restaurant in downtown Austin, somewhere we could afford without stretching our supposed budget. As we shared a bottle of wine and reflected on our relationship, she began talking about her long-term goals and dreams. She wanted to start her own marketing consultancy, travel to at least 3 new countries, maybe buy a small house with a garden where she could grow herbs and vegetables. "I know money's tight for both of us," she said, reaching across the table to take my hand, "but I feel like we're building something real together, something that's ours." Her words should have filled me with joy. Should have been the moment I finally revealed the truth about our financial situation and my ability to make all her dreams immediately achievable. Instead, I felt a crushing weight of guilt and confusion. The something real she was celebrating was built on a foundation of lies and omissions. The partnership she valued was fundamentally asymmetrical. with me holding all the power and information while she operated with incomplete knowledge of our actual circumstances. That night, lying in bed beside Jessica as she slept peacefully, I stared at the ceiling and tried to untangle the web I had created. My investments in Kane Industries had grown to the point where I effectively controlled the company's future, yet I still showed up each morning to be treated as a dispensable employee by Robert Kane. I possessed the financial means to transform Jessica's life, yet I maintained the charade of struggling alongside her. I had achieved a level of success that exceeded my wildest dreams, but I couldn't share that achievement with the person I claimed to love most. The psychological toll of living such a duplicitous existence began manifesting in physical symptoms. I developed insomnia, lying awake, calculating investment returns, and rehearsing conversations I might have with Jessica about revealing the truth. My appetite diminished as the stress of maintaining multiple identities consumed mental energy I had previously devoted to enjoying simple pleasures. Jessica noticed my weight loss and suggested I see a doctor, not knowing that my condition was emotional rather than medical. 3 months after our anniversary, David Park called with news that would force my hand in ways I hadn't anticipated. Kane Industries had received a buyout offer from a major tech conglomerate, an offer that would value the company at nearly twice its current market assessment. If the sale proceeded, my investment would generate returns that would be impossible to hide or explain away. "You're looking at a potential payout of over $40 million, David explained during our emergency meeting. "Even if you wanted to remain anonymous, the paperwork trail would eventually lead back to you. Robert Kane is going to discover that his mysterious investors have been operating under his nose this entire time." The moment of reckoning was approaching, whether I was prepared for it or not. I had built a house of cards that was about to be blown down by the very success I had orchestrated. As I drove home that evening, I practiced different ways of explaining the situation to Jessica, searching for words that could bridge the gap between the person she thought she knew and the person I had actually become. But when I walked into our apartment and found Jessica sitting on the couch with a serious expression, her laptop open to what appeared to be job listings, I realized that my time for choosing the right moment had already expired. She looked up at me with eyes that held a mixture of determination and sadness. "Ryan, we need to talk," she said, her voice carrying a gravity I hadn't heard before. "I've been thinking about our future, about whether we're really building toward the same goals." The conversation I had been dreading was about to happen, but not in the way I had imagined it. The weight of Jessica's words settled between us like a physical presence. She closed her laptop and set it aside, her movements deliberate and careful, the way someone handles fragile objects they're afraid might shatter. I could see she had been preparing for this conversation, had probably rehearsed what she wanted to say during the hours I'd spent in meetings with David, discussing investment strategies while she sat alone in our apartment, wondering why the man she loved had become a stranger. "I got a job offer today," she said, her voice steady, but tinged with something I couldn't quite identify. "Lisa forwarded me a position at a marketing firm in Denver. It's a senior role, significant pay increase, real growth potential." The word hit me harder than it should have. I had become so consumed with managing my secret financial empire that I hadn't noticed Jessica actively planning an escape route from the life we had built together. While I was orchestrating complex investment schemes, she was quietly rebuilding her career prospects in a different state, 300 miles away from everything we had shared. "That's incredible, Jess," I managed, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. "You've been wanting that kind of opportunity for months." She studied my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, as if she were searching for some reaction that would give her the information she needed to make a difficult decision. "The thing is, Ryan, I don't know if I want to take it. I don't know if I want to stay either." The brutal honesty of her statement forced me to really look at her for the first time in weeks. Jessica had lost weight, I realized, her cheekbones more pronounced than they had been during our anniversary dinner. There were shadows under her eyes that spoke of restless nights, and her usually vibrant energy seemed muted, dampened by some burden she had been carrying alone. "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew what she was going to say. Jessica stood up and moved to the window that overlooked our small balcony, where we used to drink morning coffee together and plan our weekends. "I mean that somewhere along the way, We stopped being partners. We stopped sharing our lives with each other. You come home from work, but you're not really here. You're always checking your phone, always distracted by something you won't talk about. Her words stung because they were undeniably accurate. I had been physically present, but emotionally absent. Sitting across from her at dinner while mentally calculating portfolio performance, nodding along to her stories about work, while reviewing investment reports in my head, the man she had fallen in love with. The one who used to ask thoughtful questions about her day and remember details about her projects and friendships, had gradually been replaced by someone going through the motions of intimacy while living a completely separate internal life. Work has been demanding, I offered weakly, falling back on the same excuse I had been using for months. Jessica turned from the window to face me directly, her expression a mixture of frustration and sadness. It's not just work, Ryan. It's everything. When was the last time we talked about our future together? When was the last time you shared something real with me, something that mattered to you? The question hung in the air between us, and I found myself unable to answer it. The things that mattered to me most, my investments, my growing influence over Kane Industries, my plans for the future, were all secrets I had deliberately kept from her. The real conversations in my life were happening with David Park and my financial advisors, while Jessica received only carefully edited versions of my thoughts and experiences. I applied for the Denver job because I need to know if I'm capable of building something on my own, she continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. I need to know if I can trust myself to recognize when a relationship has run its course, or if I'm going to spend years waiting for someone to come back to me, who might already be gone. The implications of her words hit me like a physical blow. Jessica wasn't just considering a career change. She was questioning the fundamental viability of our relationship. While I had been focused on accumulating wealth and power in secret, she had been watching our connection slowly dissolve and making contingency plans for a life without me. Jess, I know I've been distracted lately, but that doesn't mean I'm gone, I said, moving toward her. We can work through this. We've always been able to work through things. She held up a hand to stop my approach, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. Have we, though? Because I've been trying to work through this for months, Ryan. I've tried bringing up my concerns, tried getting you to open up, tried planning things we could do together. But every time I reach out, you're somewhere else. The accusation was fair and devastating. I thought about all the evenings she had suggested we cook dinner together while I claimed to be too tired. All the weekend plans she had proposed while I insisted I needed to catch up on work. All the moments she had created opportunities for connection that I had unconsciously sabotaged with my preoccupation with financial matters. There's something else, Jessica said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Marcus called me yesterday. The mention of my best friend's name sent a jolt of anxiety through me. Marcus and I had been talking less frequently since I had refused. His request for a loan, our conversations becoming awkward and strained. I had told myself it was temporary, that once I figured out how to handle my situation with Jessica, I would find a way to help Marcus without revealing my true circumstances. But apparently, my neglect had driven him to reach out to her instead. He's really struggling, Ryan. His rent is 2 months behind, and he's talking about giving up music entirely. He mentioned asking you for help, but said you told him things were tight for you too. Jessica's eyes searched my face. Is that true? Are we having money problems you haven't told me about? The irony was so sharp it was almost physically painful. While Marcus was facing eviction and considering abandoning his dreams for lack of a few $1,000s, I was sitting on a portfolio worth tens of millions. While Jessica was worrying about our financial stability, I possessed the means to solve every monetary concern either of them would ever have. Yet I had created a situation where the people I cared about most were suffering from problems I could effortlessly resolve, simply because I couldn't figure out how to reveal the truth without destroying the relationships I was trying to protect. No, we're not having money problems, I said carefully. I just couldn't help Marcus the way he needed right then. Jessica's expression shifted, confusion replacing the sadness. But if we're financially stable and Marcus needed help, why wouldn't you be able to loan him something small? It's Marcus, Ryan. He's been your best friend since college. He would do anything for you? I found myself trapped between competing lies, each one requiring additional deceptions to maintain. I couldn't admit to having money without explaining where it came from. I couldn't explain the inheritance without revealing the investments. I couldn't discuss the investments without exposing the elaborate scheme I had constructed around Kane Industries. Each thread of truth I might pull would unravel the entire fabric of the life I had constructed. It's complicated, I said, immediately recognizing how inadequate the response sounded. Everything's complicated with you lately, Jessica replied, her voice hardening with frustration. Nothing is ever simple or straightforward anymore. You used to be the most honest person I knew, Ryan. You used to tell me everything, share everything. Thought and worry and dream. Now I feel like I'm living with someone wearing a mask of the person I fell in love with. Her words cut deeper than any accusation of infidelity or betrayal could have. She had identified the exact nature of my transformation, the way I had gradually replaced authentic intimacy with performance. Genuine sharing with careful curation. I was indeed wearing a mask, one so convincing that I sometimes forgot I was wearing it at all. I've been thinking about accepting the Denver offer, Jessica continued, her voice becoming more resolute. Not because I want to leave you, but because I need to understand who I am when I'm not constantly trying to connect with someone who seems determined to keep me at arm's length. The finality in her tone made me realize how close I was to losing everything that actually mattered. My financial success would be meaningless if it cost me the relationship that had given my life genuine purpose and joy. Yet I still couldn't bring myself to reveal the truth. Couldn't find a way to explain 2 years of deception without making everything worse. How long do I have? I asked the question, coming out more desperate than I intended. Jessica looked surprised by my phrasing, as if she hadn't expected me to frame her potential departure as a deadline I needed to meet. The position starts in 6 weeks. I need to give them an answer by Friday. Friday was 4 days away. 4 days to figure out how to bridge the gap between the person she thought I was and the person I had actually become. For days to find a way to reveal the truth about my circumstances without destroying her trust entirely. For days to salvage a relationship that had been slowly dying while I pursued financial objectives she knew nothing about. Can I ask you something? Jessica said, moving closer, but still maintaining careful distance between us. And I need you to be completely honest with me. I nodded, though the request for honesty felt like a trap, given how thoroughly I had been avoiding it for months. Do you still love me? Not the version of me you think you're supposed to love? Not the idea of us together, but me specifically? The person I actually am right now, today. The question was so direct and vulnerable that it cut through all my layers of deception and strategic thinking. Despite everything I had been hiding from her, despite the walls I had built around my inner life, despite the way I had gradually withdrawn from our relationship, the answer was immediate and absolute. Yes, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I love you more than I know how to express. That's what makes this so terrifying. For the first time in our conversation, Jessica's composure cracked, and I saw the pain she had been carefully controlling. Then why does it feel like you've been preparing to leave me for months? Why does it feel like you've already made decisions about our future that you haven't told me about? Her perception was devastatingly accurate. I had been preparing to leave, not physically, but emotionally, creating distance and detachment as unconscious insurance against the possibility of loss. I had been making decisions about our future, complex financial plans that would affect both our lives, while deliberately excluding her from the process. I had been building a parallel life that she wasn't allowed to access, then wondering why our connection had become strained and artificial. I haven't been preparing to leave you, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't entirely true. I've been trying to protect something, but I've been doing it in all the wrong ways. Jessica wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so familiar and endearing that it made my chest ache. Protect what, Ryan? What could be so important that you'd rather sacrifice our relationship than share it with me? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized that this was the moment. This was when I either found the courage to reveal the truth about my circumstances and risk the consequences, or I let her walk away believing that I had simply stopped caring about our future together. The choice was binary and immediate, and whichever direction I went would determine not just what happened between us, but who I was going to be as a person going forward. But before I could formulate an answer, my phone buzzed with an urgent text message from David Park. Emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Kane Industries buyout accelerated. Need to discuss exit strategy immediately. The timing was cruel and perfect. The very success I had been orchestrating in secret was about to force my hand in ways I hadn't anticipated. By tomorrow evening, there was a possibility that my hidden life would begin unraveling, whether I chose to reveal it or not. The question was whether I would use this crisis as an opportunity for honesty with Jessica, or whether I would find new ways to maintain the deception that was slowly destroying everything I actually valued. The Kane Industries annual gala was supposed to be a celebration. Robert Kane had spared no expense transforming the downtown Austin ballroom into what he called a showcase of innovation and success. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in black silk, each centerpiece a miniature sculpture representing different aspects of artificial intelligence. The guest list included every major tech investor in Texas, several venture capital firms from California, and enough local dignitaries to fill the society pages for weeks. I adjusted my rented tuxedo as Jessica and I approached the registration table, her hand resting lightly on my arm in a gesture that felt more ceremonial than intimate. We had barely spoken during the drive downtown, the weight of our unresolved conversation from 3 days earlier hanging between us like a physical barrier. She had chosen a stunning emerald dress that brought out the color in her eyes, but I caught her checking her phone repeatedly, probably reviewing details about the Denver position she still hadn't given me a final answer about. The irony of attending Robert Kane's celebration while secretly owning nearly half his company wasn't lost on me. I had received the formal invitation months ago, back when I still believed I could maintain my double life indefinitely. Now walking into the ballroom where Kane would inevitably deliver some pompous speech about vision and leadership, I felt like an actor who had forgotten his lines in the middle of a performance. "Ryan, there you are." Tom Anderson appeared beside us, his face flushed with excitement and what appeared to be several glasses of the open bar's premium whiskey. Tom was one of my fellow engineers at Kane Industries, a talented developer whose enthusiasm often exceeded his professional judgment. "Have you seen this crowd? Half the Austin tech scene is here tonight." Kane really went all out. Jessica smiled politely at Tom while I scanned the room, looking for potential complications. David Park had agreed to attend as my guest, maintaining his cover is simply another investor interested in Kane Industries' growth potential. I spotted him near the bar, engaged in what appeared to be an animated conversation with several venture capitalists I recognized from business publications. "Mr. Kane's been looking for you," Tom continued, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "He mentioned wanting to introduce you to some of the investors tonight. Something about recognizing the technical team's contributions to the company's success." The suggestion that Robert Kane wanted to publicly acknowledge my work should have been gratifying. But instead, it filled me with dread. The last thing I needed was increased visibility at an event where my secret business partners were also in attendance, where one carelessly worded introduction could unravel months of careful planning. "I'll find him later," I replied, guiding Jessica toward our assigned table. "Let's grab some drinks first." As we moved through the crowd, I noticed Marcus near the entrance, looking uncomfortable in an ill-fitting suit that had probably been borrowed for the occasion. His presence surprised me. He had no obvious connection to Kane Industries or the tech industry generally. Then I saw Lisa Rodriguez from Jessica's marketing agency approaching him, and the situation became clear. Jessica had arranged for her co-worker to invite Marcus as her guest, probably hoping that an elegant evening might lift his spirits during his financial struggles. "You didn't tell me Marcus would be here," I said to Jessica as we reached the bar. "Lisa mentioned having an extra invitation," she replied, her tone carefully neutral. "I thought it might be good for him to network with some successful people. Maybe someone here could help him with his music career." The subtext was unmistakable. Jessica was creating opportunities for Marcus to find the kind of support that I had refused to provide, demonstrating through action what genuine friendship looked like. She was showing me what I should have done, what the person she thought I would have done naturally. Before I could respond, Robert Kane's voice boomed across the ballroom. As he stepped up to the microphone on the small stage that had been erected for the evening's presentations, "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could, have your attention, please?" The conversations gradually quieted as Kane adjusted his tie and surveyed the crowd with the satisfaction of someone who genuinely believed himself to be the most important person in any room. At 52, he maintained the artificially youthful appearance that seemed mandatory among tech executives, his hair perfectly styled and his smile professionally calibrated for maximum charm. 3 years ago, Kane Industries was nothing more than an ambitious idea and a handful of brilliant engineers working out of a converted warehouse, he began, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom. Tonight, we celebrate not just our financial success, but our transformation into a company that will define the future of artificial intelligence. I found myself studying Kane's performance with detached fascination. This was the man whose company I secretly controlled, whose expansion I had personally funded, whose success existed largely because of investments he knew nothing about. Yet he stood there radiating confidence and authority, completely unaware that his mysterious benefactors were sitting in his audience, watching him take credit for achievements they had made possible. None of this would have been possible without the dedication of our technical team, Kane continued, gesturing broadly toward the tables where his employees sat. These are the innovators who turn vision into reality, who solve problems that others can't even comprehend. Jessica leaned closer to me. "This is nice. When was the last time your boss publicly acknowledged your work?" The answer was never, but I couldn't explain why Kane's praise felt hollow rather than gratifying. Recognition from someone whose opinion you don't respect carries little value, and I had long since stopped viewing Robert Kane as anything more than a fortunate frontman for technologies and strategies I had helped develop. "I'd like to invite one of our senior engineers to join me on stage," Kane announced, scanning the crowd until his eyes found my table. "Ryan Mitchell has been instrumental in developing the core algorithms that power our AI systems." "Ryan, would you join me up here?" The blood drained from my face as every head in the ballroom turned toward me. This was exactly the kind of public attention I had been trying to avoid. The kind of visibility that could lead to uncomfortable questions. If the wrong person started connecting dots between my official position and my investment activities. Jessica squeezed my hand encouragingly. "Go on, this is your moment." I stood reluctantly and made my way through the applause toward the stage, hyper-aware of David Park watching me from across the room. As I climbed the steps, Kane extended his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ryan represents the kind of technical excellence that makes Kane Industries special," he said into the microphone, keeping one hand on my shoulder in a gesture that felt more possessive than friendly. "He's the sort of employee who stays late, who tackles the difficult problems, who never complains about the workload." There was something in Kane's tone that set off alarm bells in my mind. The praise felt backhanded, emphasizing my role as a dedicated worker rather than a strategic contributor. I caught a glimpse of Jessica in the audience, beaming with pride, completely unaware of the complex dynamics playing out on stage. In fact, Kane continued, his grip tightening slightly on my shoulder, "Ryan embodies what I love most about our technical team: complete loyalty, unwavering dedication, and the wisdom to recognize their place in the larger vision." The condescension was subtle but unmistakable, packaged within what appeared to be genuine appreciation. Kane was reminding me, and everyone in the room, of my position in his hierarchy. He was making it clear that despite my technical contributions, I remained an employee, someone whose job was to execute his ideas rather than shape the company's direction. "Thank you, Mr. Kane," I managed, keeping my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to work on such innovative projects." The polite response seemed to satisfy Kane, and he released his grip on my shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen, Ryan Mitchell," he announced, gesturing for applause as I made my way back to my table. Jessica was still smiling when I sat down, but I could see questions forming in her eyes. She had noticed something in the exchange, some undercurrent that didn't match the surface celebration. "That was interesting," she said quietly, as Kane launched into the next portion of his speech. He seemed to be making a point beyond just acknowledging your work. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated with a text message from David Park. "We need to talk. Now. Meet me in the hotel lobby in 10 minutes. The urgency in his message sent adrenaline coursing through my system. David never requested emergency meetings unless something significant had changed with our investments. I glanced across the room and saw him making his way toward the exit, his expression grim. "I need to step out for a few minutes," I told Jessica, standing up again. "Business call." Her expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. "During Kane's speech? Can't it wait?" "It's important," I said. Already moving away from the table, "I'll be right back." I found David in the hotel lobby, pacing near the elevators, with his phone pressed to his ear. When he saw me approaching, he ended his call abruptly. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "A big one." "What kind of problem?" David glanced around the lobby, ensuring we wouldn't be overheard. "Kane's been investigating his funding sources. He hired a forensic accounting firm to trace the shell companies that have been investing in his business. The implications hit me immediately. If Kane discovered the true ownership structure of his company, if he learned that his own employee had been secretly orchestrating his success, the consequences would extend far beyond professional embarrassment." "How much does he know?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Enough to be suspicious, not enough to have proof yet." "But Ryan, if he connects the dots, if he figures out that you're behind Sterling Holdings and the other investments..." David didn't need to finish the sentence. "Kane would realize that I had been playing a game he didn't even know existed. That every success he had celebrated, every expansion he had approved, every strategic decision he thought was his own, had been influenced by someone he treated as a subordinate." "There's more," David continued. "The buyout offer we discussed? It's not just a possibility anymore. The acquiring company made a formal offer this afternoon. Kane's board is meeting tomorrow to vote on whether to accept." "What does that mean?" "For us, it means that by tomorrow night, either we're about to become extremely wealthy when the sale goes through, or Kane's investigation discovers our involvement, and everything falls apart spectacularly." I felt the walls closing in around me, the careful structure I had built over 2 years threatening to collapse in a matter of hours. Upstairs, Jessica was watching Kane's speech, probably wondering why I had left in the middle of what should have been a career highlight. At home, Marcus was struggling with rent payments while I possessed the means to solve his problems with pocket change. Somewhere in the Kane Industries offices, forensic accountants were methodically tracing financial records that would eventually lead them to my carefully hidden identity. "What do we do?" I asked. David's expression was grave. "We have 2 choices. We can try to liquidate our positions immediately, take whatever we can get, and disappear from Kane's radar entirely. Or we can double down, hope the buyout goes through before Kane's investigation concludes, and deal with the consequences afterward." "What are the consequences if he finds out?" "Best case scenario, you lose your job and face some awkward questions about insider trading. Worst case, federal investigation, criminal charges, complete destruction of your professional reputation." I thought about Jessica upstairs, still believing I was the person she had fallen in love with, still trying to decide whether our relationship was worth salvaging. I thought about the Denver job offer that represented her escape route from a life that had become increasingly complicated by secrets she knew nothing about. I thought about the promises I had made to myself about honesty and authenticity, all abandoned in pursuit of financial success that was now threatening to destroy everything I actually cared about. "There's a third option," I said slowly, "Anne." Idea forming as I spoke. What if Kane finds out, but he finds out on my terms? David looked confused. "What do you mean? What if I tell him myself? What if I go upstairs right now and explain everything, publicly, in front of all his investors and employees?" "Ryan, that would be career suicide. It'd be admitting to systematic deception, to manipulating your own employer. Kane would destroy you." I looked through the lobby windows toward the ballroom where Kane was probably still delivering his speech, still basking in applause for achievements that existed because of my hidden involvement. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it's time for him to learn exactly who he's been talking down to all these years." The decision crystallized in my mind with shocking clarity. I was tired of living in fear, tired of maintaining facades, tired of watching people I cared about suffer while I hoarded resources and opportunities. If my secret life was going to be exposed anyway, I would control how and when it happened. I would finally give Robert Kane the surprise he deserved, and give Jessica the honesty she had been asking for, regardless of the consequences. "You're serious about this," David said, recognizing the determination in my expression. "Dead serious. Kane wants to remind me of my place in his company. It's time he learned exactly what that place really is." I walked back into that ballroom with a clarity I hadn't felt in 2 years. The champagne glasses caught the light from the chandeliers, casting tiny rainbows across the white tablecloths, and I noticed details I had missed before. The nervous energy of the venture capitalists. The way Kane's employees clustered together like they were seeking safety in numbers. The particular quality of forced laughter that accompanies corporate celebrations where everyone's job security depends on. Appearing enthusiastic, Jessica looked up as I approached our table, her expression shifting from mild concern to something approaching alarm when she saw my face. "Ryan, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," I replied, but my attention was already focused on the stage where Kane was wrapping up his presentation with customary grandiosity about market disruption and revolutionary technology. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't about to become so personally destructive. I didn't sit down. Instead, I stood behind my chair and waited, my hands steady despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. Marcus caught my eye from across the room and raised his glass in a small salute, probably thinking I was standing in appreciation of Kane's speech. The gesture nearly broke my resolve. In 30 minutes, Marcus would understand exactly why I hadn't been able to help him with his rent money, and the knowledge would change everything between us forever. Kane concluded his remarks to enthusiastic applause, then stepped away from the microphone to mingle with the investors who had approached the stage. This was typically when the evening would transition into the networking phase, when business cards would be exchanged and deals would be discussed over increasingly expensive whiskey. Instead, I made my way back toward the stage, moving against the flow of the crowd. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice carrying further than I had expected. A few heads turned in my direction, but Kane was still engaged in animated conversation with a woman I recognized as a partner from a major venture capital firm. "Excuse me," I repeated, louder this time, and the conversations around me began to quiet. Kane looked up with an expression of mild irritation, probably assuming one of his employees needed something that could have waited until Monday morning. "Ryan, what can I do for you?" he asked with the patronizing patience he reserved for subordinates who were interrupting important business. "I'd like to address something you said earlier," I replied, stepping closer to the stage, about recognizing one's place in the larger vision. Khan's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly, and I could see him calculating whether this was going to become the kind of scene that would embarrass him in front of his investors. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately later?" "No. I think this conversation needs to happen here in front of everyone who heard your earlier comments." The ballroom was quieting now as people sensed the shift in atmosphere. Jessica had stood up at our table, her face pale with confusion and growing dread. David Park was moving closer to the stage, probably hoping he could somehow contain whatever was about to unfold. Kane's expression had hardened into something approaching hostility. "Ryan, I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish here," Kane said, his voice carrying the edge of authority he used when reminding people of their employment status. "But this isn't the appropriate venue for whatever grievance you think you have." "My grievance?" I said, and found myself almost laughing at the understatement. "You want to talk about my place in your vision, Robert? Let me tell you about my actual place in this company." I could see security personnel moving toward the edges of the ballroom. It's probably summoned by Kane's silent signal to one of his assistants. The venture capitalists, who had been crowding around the stage, stepped back slightly, suddenly uncomfortable with their proximity to what appeared to be an employee having some kind of breakdown. "For the past 2 years," I continued, my voice carrying clearly across the now silent room, "Kane Industries has received mysterious investments from several shell companies. Sterling Holdings, Phoenix Ventures, Meridian Capital. Ring any bells, Robert?" Kane's face went completely white. The venture capital partner he had been talking to looked between us with growing alarm. probably wondering if she was about to witness corporate espionage being confessed in real time. Those investments, I continued, the ones that have funded your expansion, your research and development, your ability to compete with companies 10 times your size, they didn't come from mysterious benefactors who believed in your vision. They came from me. The silence in the ballroom was absolute now. Even the catering staff had stopped moving, sensing that something unprecedented was unfolding. Kane opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, apparently unable to process what he was hearing. 47%, to be precise, I added, enjoying the way his face cycled through expressions of disbelief, rage, and something approaching panic. I own nearly half of Kane Industries, Robert. I've owned it for 2 years. Every major, the decision you've made, every expansion you've celebrated, every success you've taken credit for has been possible because I provided the capital that made it feasible. Marcus had pushed through the crowd and was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Jessica remained frozen at our table, one hand pressed to her mouth as if she could somehow contain the shock of what she was learning about, the person she thought she knew. Do you want to talk about knowing one's place? I continued, addressing Kane directly but speaking loudly enough for the entire room to hear. My place is as the primary investor in this company. My place is as the person whose algorithms power your AI systems. My place is as someone who has been watching you take credit for achievements that wouldn't exist without my contributions, both technical and financial. Kane found his voice finally, though it came out as more of a croak. This is impossible. We vetted all our investors. We know who our funding sources are. You know what your lawyers and accountants told you? I corrected. You know the names on the incorporation documents for companies I created specifically to hide my involvement. You never bothered to investigate further because the money was good and the terms were favorable. You never asked hard questions because the funding allowed you to maintain the illusion that you were building something through your own vision and leadership. David Park had reached the edge of the stage now, his face a mask of professional neutrality that I knew concealed absolute panic. This was not how we had planned to handle the revelation of our arrangement. This was not a controlled disclosure designed to minimize legal exposure. This was the complete destruction of 2 years of careful planning, executed in the most public and irreversible way possible. The forensic accounting firm you hired? I added, noting Kane's sharp intake of breath. You're going to trace those shell companies back to me eventually, probably by tomorrow morning if they're competent. I'm simply saving everyone the time and expense of a lengthy investigation. Kane stepped back from the microphone as if it had become radioactive, his eyes darting around the room as he apparently tried to calculate the damage this revelation would cause to his reputation and business relationships. Venture capitalists were already moving toward the exits, probably making mental notes about which of their investments might be compromised by association with Kane Industries. Why? Kane asked, his voice barely audible. Why would you do this? Why would you sabotage your own investment by revealing it like this? It was a reasonable question, one that David Park was probably asking himself as he watched months of legal strategy and financial planning evaporate in real time. The answer was complicated, involving 2 years of emotional suppression, the slow dissolution of my relationship with Jessica, my inability to help Marcus when he needed it, and a growing awareness that wealth accumulated through deception was ultimately worthless. Because I'm tired of pretending, I said simply. I'm tired of watching you treat me like an expendable employee while I secretly own half your company. I'm tired of sitting through meetings where you dismiss my ideas, then profit from implementing them. I'm tired of being introduced as someone who knows his place when my place is actually as your business partner and primary stakeholder. Jessica had moved closer to the stage now, her face a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. 2 years? She called out, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversations that had begun around the edges of the ballroom.
Oh, you've
Been hiding this for 2 years?
Oh.
The question was directed at me, but it was Kane who answered. He's been lying too. Everyone for 2 years. Employees aren't allowed to invest in their own companies without disclosure. This is securities fraud, stock manipulation, insider trading. Ryan, you've just confessed to federal crimes in front of 200 witnesses. The legal implications of my confession began settling over me like a weight I hadn't fully considered. In my determination to expose Kane's hypocrisy and end the charade that had been consuming my life, I had potentially destroyed any possibility of a legitimate future in the tech industry. The SEC would investigate. Federal prosecutors would review the case. My decision to seek honesty through public revelation had probably guaranteed that the consequences would be far more severe than if I had simply liquidated my positions quietly and disappeared. But as I looked out at the faces staring back at me, I realized that the financial and legal consequences were secondary to the human cost of what I had just revealed. Jessica's expression had shifted from shock to something approaching disgust, not at the financial complexity of what I had done, but at the fundamental dishonesty it represented. Marcus looked like he was trying to solve a puzzle, probably calculating how someone with my apparent resources had been unable to help him avoid eviction. "The buyout offer," Kane said suddenly, his voice stronger now as he apparently began to grasp the full scope of the situation. "You knew about the buyout offer? You've known about it for weeks? Known about it since before it was made?" I confirmed. "My investment advisor has been in discussions with the acquiring company for over a month. The offer exists because I provided the financial documentation that convinced them Kane Industries was worth acquiring." Kane's face went through another cycle of expressions as he processed this information. "You orchestrated your own exit strategy. You've been planning to sell your stake and leave me to deal with the aftermath." I admitted, until about 10 minutes ago, when I decided that watching you take credit for other people's work had become more expensive than I was willing to pay. The security personnel had reached the stage now, but Kane waved them back with a gesture that suggested he wasn't sure whether to have me arrested or applaud my corporate manipulation skills. The venture capitalists had mostly fled, leaving behind a room full of Kane Industries employees and local business associates who were trying to process what they had just witnessed. "You've destroyed everything," Kane said, his voice dropping to something approaching a whisper. "The company's reputation, the investor confidence we've spent years building, you've destroyed it all for what? Some kind of revenge fantasy?" "I've told the truth," I replied. "Everything else is just consequences." Jessica approached the stage, her expression unreadable. "Ryan, we need to talk now. The command in." Her voice was unmistakable. And I realized that the conversation I had been avoiding for months was about to happen, whether I was prepared for it or not. The professional destruction I had just orchestrated was about to be followed by the personal reckoning I had been trying to postpone. "Yes," I said, stepping down from the stage. "I think we do." As we moved toward the exit, I caught sight of David Park shaking his head in what appeared to be professional admiration mixed with personal horror. Kane remained on the stage, apparently still processing what had happened to his carefully constructed evening. Marcus was pushing through the crowd toward us, his expression a mixture of confusion and something that might have been betrayal. The ballroom doors closed behind us, muffling the sound of conversations that would probably continue until dawn as everyone tried to make sense of what they had just witnessed. In the hotel lobby, Jessica turned to face me with an expression I had never seen before. 2 years, she said, her voice barely controlled. 2 years of lies, of watching me worry about money, of pretending to be someone you're not. Jessica. Let me explain. Explain what, Ryan? Explain how you could watch Marcus struggle with rent while you owned 47% of a tech company. Explain how you could let me agonize over a job offer in Denver while you had millions of dollars. You never bothered to mention. The questions were fair and devastating, each one highlighting a specific moment when my deception had caused unnecessary pain to people I claimed to care about. I had been so focused on protecting my secret that I had lost sight of the human cost of maintaining it. You want to know what the worst part is? Jessica continued, tears forming in her eyes. It's not the money, Ryan. It's that you looked me in the eye every day for 2 years and chose to lie to me. You chose to let me believe we were building something together when you had already decided our future without including me in the decision. The accusation was accurate and final. I had indeed been making unilateral decisions about our shared life, funding companies and planning exit strategies, while maintaining the fiction that we were equal partners in a relationship built on mutual trust and shared goals. I never meant for it to happen like this, I said, though the words sounded inadequate even to me. How did you mean for it to happen, Ryan? When exactly were you planning to tell me the truth? After you sold your stake and moved to Portland? After you'd already decided whether or not our relationship fit into your grand financial strategy? The questions hung in the air between us, and I realized that I didn't have acceptable answers. I had been making decisions based on fear and control, treating Jessica like a variable in an equation rather than a partner, whose input might have been valuable in navigating the complexities of sudden wealth and professional deception. Behind us, the ballroom doors opened and Marcus emerged, his expression grim. The conversation that was about to happen would determine not just what remained of my relationship with Jessica, but whether I had any genuine friendships left to salvage from the wreckage of my secret life. 18 months later, I stood in the rain outside Pioneer Courthouse Square in Portland, watching steam rise from my coffee cup as commuters hurried past with their umbrellas and determined expressions. The Pacific Northwest had embraced me, with its characteristic blend of beauty and melancholy, offering exactly the kind of anonymity I had needed to rebuild my life from scratch. The federal investigation had concluded with substantial fines but no criminal charges, partly because my voluntary disclosure had demonstrated cooperation, and partly because the prosecutors had bigger cases to pursue than a software engineer, who had been too clever with his investment strategies. The settlement with Kane Industries had been surprisingly straightforward once the lawyers finished posturing. Robert Kane had been more interested in controlling the narrative than seeking maximum punishment, and my willingness to transfer my remaining shares back to the company for far less than their market value had helped smooth the negotiations. The Denver Post had run a small story about corporate governance issues at a Texas tech firm, but the details were buried in business section coverage that most people ignored. Marcus found me first, 3 months after the gala. He tracked me down through Sarah, who had been the only person I had kept in regular contact with during my self-imposed exile. He appeared at my downtown Portland apartment on a Tuesday evening, carrying a guitar case and wearing the same uncertain expression he had worn the night everything fell apart. "You could have just written a check," he said after I let him in. And we settled into the uncomfortable conversation that had been inevitable since the moment I revealed my financial situation. At any point in the last 2 years, you could have just written a check and solved every problem I was worried about. The accusation was fair and brutal, cutting directly to the core of how my deception had affected everyone around me. "You're right," I said, because attempting to justify my choices would have only made things worse. I was so focused on protecting my secret that I forgot what friendship actually means. Marcus set his guitar case against the wall and looked around my sparse apartment, taking in the deliberately minimal furnishings and the view of the Willamette River through rain-streaked windows. "The weird thing is, I'm not even angry about the money anymore. What bothers me is that you thought so little of our friendship that you'd rather watch me struggle than risk telling me the truth." The conversation lasted for hours, covering everything from our college years to the specific moment when I had decided that maintaining my facade was more important than helping him avoid eviction. Marcus had moved to Austin permanently, found steady session work with several bands, and was finally recording the album he had dreamed about for years. He was funding it himself, through the kind of disciplined saving and creative hustling that I could have eliminated with a single phone call. "I needed to know I could do it on my own," he explained, as we shared a bottle of wine I had been saving, for an occasion that never seemed to arrive. It turns out that was more important to me than taking shortcuts, even well-intentioned ones. We parted as friends, but different kinds of friends than we had been before. There was an understanding between us now about the weight of secrets and the cost of good intentions that are never acted upon. Marcus promised to send me a copy of his album when it was finished, and I promised to buy concert tickets the next time his tour brought him through Portland. Jessica never came to Portland, but she called 6 months after the gala, her voice carrying across the country with a clarity that made the distance between us feel irrelevant. She had taken the Denver job and was thriving in ways that surprised her, building client relationships and developing marketing strategies for startups that reminded her why she had chosen her profession in the first place. "I've been thinking about us," she said during our first real conversation since that night in the hotel lobby. "About whether I could have handled the truth if you had told me earlier?" The question had been occupying my thoughts as well, particularly During the long Portland evenings, when the rain provided a soundtrack for examining the decisions that had brought me to this particular moment of solitude, what conclusion did you reach? I think I would have been overwhelmed at first, Jessica admitted. The money, the complexity, the implications. But I also think I would have wanted to figure it out together as a team. What I couldn't handle was being excluded from decisions. That affected both our lives. The distinction was important and painful. My fear of overwhelming her had led to choices that were far more damaging than the truth would have been. By trying to protect Jessica from complexity, I had denied her the opportunity to demonstrate the strength and wisdom that had attracted me to her in the first place. "Are you happy?" I asked, genuinely curious about the life she had built without me. "Getting there," she replied. "Some days are better than others. But I wake up every morning knowing that the person I'm with is someone who tells me the truth, even when it's difficult." The conversation ended with something approaching closure, an acknowledgement that we had both learned valuable lessons from the dissolution of our relationship. Jessica wished me well in Portland, and I meant it when I told her that Denver sounded like exactly the fresh start she had needed. The most surprising development came 8 months after my arrival in Portland, when I met Dr. Rachel Kim at a coffee shop in the Alberta Arts District. She was a behavioral economist who had recently relocated from Chicago to join the faculty at Portland State University. And our initial conversation about the ethics of technological innovation stretched across 3 hours and 2 additional venues. Rachel knew nothing about my history with Kane Industries or the circumstances that had brought me to Portland. But she was fascinated by my perspectives on corporate decision-making and the psychological factors that drive business strategy. Our relationship developed slowly, built on shared interests in behavioral psychology and sustainable technology and the desperate intensity that had characterized my time with Jessica. "You think very carefully about unintended consequences," Rachel observed during one of our early conversations. "Most people in tech are focused on innovation and disruption. You seem more concerned with the human impact of the systems you help create." The insight was perceptive and accurate. My experience with Kane Industries taught me that success without consideration for its effects on relationships and communities was ultimately hollow. I had learned to value sustainable growth over dramatic expansion, authentic connection over strategic networking, and honest communication over careful image management. When I finally told Rachel about my past, 6 months into our relationship, her response surprised me with its thoughtfulness rather than judgment. "You made mistakes," she said, after I finished explaining the whole complicated story. "But you also learned from them in ways that changed who you are as a person. That growth is more valuable than perfection." The conversation took place on a hiking trail in the Columbia River Gorge, with waterfalls providing a backdrop for the kind of honest discussion I had never managed with Jessica. Rachel listened to the entire story without interrupting, asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her genuine interest in understanding rather than evaluating my choices. "What matters now isn't what you did then," she continued, as we paused at a scenic overlook. "What matters is whether you can build relationships based on the person you've become rather than the person you used to be." The challenge was both simple and profound. Could I maintain the emotional honesty I had finally learned while building something new with someone who had never known me as anything other than authentic? Could I trust someone enough to share my fears and aspirations in real time rather than constructing elaborate protective strategies? The answer, I discovered, was cautiously affirmative. Rachel and I developed a rhythm of communication that prioritized transparency over comfort, discussing potential problems before they became actual problems, and addressing concerns as they arose rather than letting them accumulate into relationship-threatening issues. A year after meeting Rachel, I received an email that brought my Portland chapter full circle. It was from David Park, who had weathered the Kane Industries scandal with his reputation largely intact, and had recently launched his own investment advisory firm focused on ethical technology companies. "I have a proposition," David wrote. "There's a startup in Portland working on sustainable AI applications for environmental monitoring. They need both technical expertise and funding, but they're committed to transparent business practices and equitable profit sharing. Interested in getting back in the game but doing it right this time? The opportunity intrigued me not because it represented a chance to rebuild my wealth, but because it offered the possibility of applying the lessons I had learned about honesty, collaboration, and sustainable success. Rachel and I discussed the potential implications for our relationship, the demands it would place on my time, and the ethical considerations of returning to the investment world. "You're a different person now," Rachel concluded after our conversations. "The question is whether you trust yourself to stay that person when success starts happening again." The question was fair and essential. Success had corrupted me once, leading to choices that prioritized financial achievement over authentic relationships. Could I maintain the psychological clarity I had developed during my Portland exile when faced with the pressures and opportunities of building another company? I decided the only way to find out was to accept David's proposition while implementing safeguards that would prevent me from repeating my previous mistakes. Rachel would be involved in all major decisions from the beginning. Any investments would be disclosed transparently to all relevant parties. Success would be measured not just in financial returns, but in the positive impact on employees, communities, and environmental sustainability. The new venture launched 6 months later, David handling the business development while I contributed technical expertise, and Rachel provided behavioral economics consultation on company culture and decision-making processes. Called it Cascade Innovations, reflecting both our Pacific Northwest location and our commitment to creating positive ripple effects through our work. 2 years after fleeing Austin in disgrace, I found myself building something genuinely meaningful, with people I trusted completely. The financial returns were modest compared to my Kane Industries windfall, but the psychological rewards were immeasurable. I went to sleep each night knowing that everyone important in my life understood who I really was and what I was trying to accomplish. Transformation wasn't complete or permanent. Maintaining authenticity requires constant attention and occasional course corrections. But I had learned that the alternative to honest relationships isn't protection from pain. It's isolation, deception, and the gradual erosion of everything that makes success meaningful in the first place. Standing in that Portland square, watching the rain, and thinking about the strange journey that had brought me to this moment of clarity, I realized that losing everything I thought I wanted had been the prerequisite for finding everything I actually needed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.